Hi, everybody. My name is Effie.Sussman. Welcome to the Sikos Haranshir. We're going to do Sikha number 30. This is actually a pretty interesting piece. It goes into dealings with Nikias and cleanliness, and in specific about proper bathroom practices. Just bear with the piece because, as with all Rebbe Nachman's teachings, there's great lessons to be learned. And this piece has a very novel teaching about not being too strict on oneself. Okay, so we're going to go straight to reading the piece. I'm just going to get the share screen up here. Okay. Okay. So here we are, 30. So there are many who would spend much time in the lavatory attempting to totally cleanse out their bodies before praying in the morning. The Rebbe spoke out strongly and ridiculed this practice. He said that the main thing to remember is that the Torah was not given to ministering angels. It is not necessary to go beyond the requirement of the law, and the codes state that it is only forbidden to worship when one actually feels the need to relieve himself. The Talmudic dictum is one who finds it necessary to move his bowels should not worship. Still, many laws are brought in Chapter 92 of the Shulchan Aruch, especially in an emergency or when one has no other choice. The Magen Avraham follows this opinion of the Rif, that one may worship even if he feels a need, as long as he can contain himself long enough to walk a league. From all this, we see that there is no need to be overly strict in this respect. One should not keep himself from worship and study just for the sake of a mere qualm, which in itself is unnecessary strictness and foolishness. The best thing is to worship as soon as you wake up in the morning. If you can easily attend to your needs, then do so. But if not, pray immediately. Even if you have a slight feeling in your bowels, it can be ignored. You should also not spend too much time in the lavatory in general. This can cause all sorts of ailments and severely damage your health. This is especially true in lavatories where one must squat, for remaining in such a position too long can result in a serious case of hemorrhoids. You should therefore avoid too much time there. In general, you should not seek unnecessarily harsh disciplines, for these can lead to serious depression. What might have been written earlier was not said for our generation. The Rebbe himself had made this error in his youth, doing many unusual things to achieve bodily purity. He went so far that he endangered his health and even his life. But finally he realized that it was foolishness and a waste of precious time, for it is actually impossible to ever purify the body completely of all waste matter. Even a person who fasts from Shabbos to Shabbos must still move his bowels, even at the end of the week. He may have gone several days without food, but something still remains in the body. I'm sorry, the last page of this didn't make it to the share screen. There's just one more paragraph, so I'm just going to read it. The Rebbe said that it was very important for him to speak out about this, stressing that people not waste time in such foolishness. Even if one must spend time in the lavatory, it's better to leave and return rather than to remain for a long time at once. Okay, so we're going to stop the share. Okay, so I'm just going to recap the piece a little bit. So Rebbe Nachman talks about people who spend a lot of time in the bathroom to move their bowels before davening. And just to give a bit of history, this was a major practice with a lot of Hasidic sects in Rebbe Nachman's times. It seems that it was a thing that delayed people from davening bismano. And Rebbe Nachman is telling his followers that it's foolish to be overly careful about this, and in effect, miss out on tefillah and learning Torah. And FYI, I happen to know a few people who have a whole morning routine due to this also, so I don't think it was just in those times, but that's a side point. Okay, so Rebbe Nachman brings a quote from Brachos where he says that the Torah was not given to ministering angels, meaning a person's not expected to be perfect. So as long as a person doesn't feel the need to use a bathroom as they're praying, then they're okay. He tells us that back in the day, people practiced very stressful and difficult things in order to separate their desires from themselves. But Rebbe Nachman is saying, that's not for us anymore. That was for the past generations, not for us. These things will cause us depression. Even Rebbe Nachman did these things when he was young, but he realized it was a waste of time. At the end of this teaching, Rebbe Nachman tells us that this subject was very important for Rebbe Nachman to teach. Clearly, from Rebbe Nachman's statement, the subject of a person enforcing too much stringencies on themselves was something he felt passionate about. Okay, so just another side point that I felt the need to mention when I prepared this piece is one of my few jobs is that I'm a massage therapist and reflexologist. And in reflexology, we learned that a lot of our physical ailments have a mental, emotional component to it. So constipation actually has to do with not letting go in like our thought process, meaning like holding on to old thinking, holding on to certain ideas, certain personal truths. And I say the word personal because every person has their own value system and truth system that they go by. Like an example, let's say, simple example is like a husband always needs to take out the garbage. So this is a truth that some wives might live by, and some wives realize it's just not going to happen, you know. And when that truth is being challenged, they have a hard time. They have a hard time of letting go. Like maybe another truth for many is I need to do certain things in my religious practice in order for me to be a good Jew and in order for me to feel good about myself. This is, you know, I think that happens to us all the time, you know, and this is a certain truth that someone might hold on to. Like another example, like if I don't finish all of Tehillim every month, if I don't do my monthly Tehillim, then I get really upset about it. And, you know, in a way where I can't let it go. And I'm, you know, I feel down on myself. So this type of thinking, type of holding on, it's like a certain rigidness or stinginess, so to speak, without being aware, like we lose the sense of like the flexibility that's within us and within the world and within Hashem. And when a person stops holding on to these truths and accepts new truths and new ideas, then that allows movement in the like inside the person's body as well. And just, you know, an interesting thing. But I do think that Rebbe Nachman was telling us, like when he says the Torah was not given to ministering angels, like he's trying to tell us that there is a lot of flexibility in this world. Like, of course, we need to try and keep halachas, and we need to try and do our best every day. But what we're able to do one day might not be the same thing that we're able to do another day. And that's okay, you know? So, okay. You know, it also reminded me of Rebbe Nachman's story of the Lost Princess. So whoever has not read it, definitely should. It's a life changer. And it's a story about a king who loved his daughter very much. And this is, by the way, a very quick recap, like read it for yourself. But so it's a story about a king who loved his daughter very much. And one day she made him upset, and the king said that the evil one should take you away. And the next day the princess went missing. So the king felt terrible, and he was very, very distraught. And his viceroy saw how upset that the king was, and he wanted to bring so he decided he was going to bring the princess back to the king. So there's a lot of symbolism in every part of this story. But the main point that I would like to discuss is that when the viceroy sets out to look for the princess, he travels through forests and deserts and fields, and he's going far and wide, and he can't find her. Very little progress. And then, you know, he's in one of the deserts, and he sees a path to the side. And he says, maybe this path is less traveled, and it will take me to an inhabited area. So I think Rebbe Nachman was trying to teach us time and time again to travel on a new path and to look at things differently and to be flexible within ourselves and to find a new way, like a way of serving Hashem genuinely and with happiness. And Rebbe Nachman knew that too much stringency would depress people. And Rebbe Nachman had this new path, this way of teaching people to connect to Hashem without being too strict on themselves. He wanted his students to judge themselves favorably and judge their friends favorably and mainly serve Hashem with happiness. And it wasn't just, you know, judging favorably. It was finding the good points within a person. Of course, a person should follow Halacha, but it's not supposed to lead you to be depressed and inflexible. So Rebbe Nachman said himself that he was overly strict on himself when he was young. So I'm going to read a few pieces from Shifchei Iran. That's his praises. These are stories about Rebbe Nachman. Just going to share the screen again. So we're going to do the first one. Okay. These are stories to show how strict Rebbe Nachman actually was on himself. At 6, okay. As a small child, the Rebbe decided that he would detach himself completely from this world. His first step would be to stop having any pleasure from eating. Realizing that he was still growing and could not give up regular meals, he decided that he would swallow his food without chewing it. In this manner, he would not derive any pleasure from it. He continued doing this until his throat became completely swollen. When the Rebbe recounted this, he mentioned that he was only 6 years old at the time. We once heard of a great tzaddik who swallowed his food without chewing it, and this was considered very unique. The Rebbe did this when he was just a child. Okay, and now we're going to skip to number 9. The Rebbe engaged in very many fasts. Even while still in his teens, he fasted from Shabbos to Shabbos many times. There were occasions when he fasted from Shabbos to Shabbos twice in succession. Although the Rebbe was a child of delights, raised in comfort, he was very thin. Still, he would disregard himself completely, fasting and mortifying himself in every possible way. Once he fasted from Shabbos to Shabbos 18 times in a single year. So he definitely, I mean, these are just 2 stories of these very intense practices that he did. One is that he would swallow his food whole. And the second is that he would fast very, very often and regularly. I'll speak for myself that before I started learning Rebbe Nachman's Torahs, I remember being, very serious. Like I was scared constantly that I was falling down a downward path. And because of it, I kept on adding like so many things onto my avoda, and just looking back, I was miserable. I didn't realize so much then, but looking back, I see like it was, I lived fearful, I was always afraid, and like learning these Torahs really taught me that there is a better way and a much happier way. And it taught me to trust myself more. Like it gave me more expansiveness. There are times when I see people who are stuck in that derech, and it doesn't always, obviously, but it could lead to depression. And I think that's why it's a mitzvah to teach Rebbe Nachman's teachings. So many people are sapped of their energy. And I mean, we have a lot of rules, we do. But I believe that Rebbe Nachman was trying to teach us a way to be less rigid and more happy. So there's another Sichos Haran piece that I want to bring into this also, and to expand on this point. Number 235. Again, I'm going to go to the share screen. Okay. Oop, here it is. Okay. In the second part of Likutei Moharan, lesson number 44, the Rebbe cautions us not to be overly stringent in any observance. The Rebbe quotes the Talmudic maxim, God does not rule over his creatures with tyranny, and the Torah was not given to ministering angels. The Rebbe also said, it is written that every man should choose one observance and keep it very strictly with all its fine points. Talmud alludes to this, where Rabbi Yosef asked Rabba's son, with what observance was your father most careful? Even with this observance, you should not be abnormally strict to the point of foolishness. Certainly do not let it make you depressed. Simply keep all its finer points without fanaticism. Keep one commandment strictly, but others need not be observed with any unnecessary stringency at all. It would be enough if we were worthy of keeping all of the Torah's commandments according to the law without going beyond it. The Rebbe was also very much against all the special stringencies that are observed on Pesach. Many people went so far in observing many fine points of custom that they were literally depressed by the holiday. He spoke about this at length. One of his followers once asked the Rebbe exactly how to act with regard to an ultra-stringent observance. The Rebbe made a joke of it. The Rebbe spoke about this quite often. He said that these ultra-strict practices are nothing more than confused foolishness. He told us that he had also been caught up in this and would waste much time thinking of all sorts of unnecessary restrictions. Once he worried about the drinking water used during Pesach. He was afraid that a small amount of leaven might have fallen into the well from which they drew water. The only alternative would be to prepare water in advance for their entire Passover week, as some people do. But this was also not good enough, for the water had to be carefully safeguarded from leaven from the day before Pesach, and this was very difficult. The Rebbe finally came to the conclusion that the only satisfactory water would be that drawn from a flowing spring just as it emerges from the ground. He could then obtain perfectly fresh water without any possibility of its being contaminated. The problem was that only such spring in the area was very far from his home. He thought about traveling to a place near a spring and spending Pesach there. This is an example of how deeply the Rebbe had become involved in such unnecessary strictness, but how he ridiculed this and taught that such ultra-strictness is unnecessary, even on Pesach. I know I should have given this before Pesach. Sorry, all those women that are listening that killed themselves over Pesach, but you'll know for next year, God willing. Okay, when the Rebbe spoke about this, he continued, true devotion consists mainly of simplicity and sincerity. Pray much, study much Torah, do many good deeds. Do not worry yourself with unnecessary restrictions. Just follow the way of our forefathers. The Torah was not given to the ministering angels. This is why people no longer study dikduk, the rules of precise grammar. People have abandoned it because this type of precision is not really necessary. This is true of all areas. You should not be overly precise in seeking out restrictions. The Rebbe spoke at length along this line, concluding, there is nothing that you absolutely must do. And if not, if you can, fine. But if not, God exempts a person under duress. Such a powerful piece. Okay, so, I'll just recap quickly. So Rebbe Nachman tells us that there's no need for stringencies, and it just brings a lot of confusion to people. And if a person wants to take one mitzvah and guard it very carefully, that's a good thing. But even with that, it shouldn't drive you crazy. Again, we learn of another story about Rebbe Nachman being overly strict on himself over Pesach. And he made fun of himself for it. Like he laughed about it with his students, thinking that it was just ridiculous. Rebbe Nachman says, there's a great line, true devotions mainly come from simplicity and sincerity. Pray much, study much, and do many good deeds. So that's it. That's what he's coming to tell us. Rebbe Nachman ends, basically saying, another great thing is like whatever a person can't do, they can't do. You can't get depressed over these things, you have to move on. So the subject actually reminds me of Adam and Chava. Also, like when I was reading this, Hashem told Adam that he shouldn't eat from the Eitz Hadas, right? And Adam told Chava, don't touch the Eitz Hadas, don't even touch it. So then, as we know, the Nachash pushed Chava onto that Eitz Hadas, and she touched it, and she saw she was okay. So she figured she could then eat the fruit too. So like we see here, like Adam missed the boat, it's like we have to know what's chumras and what's halacha. And we have to be careful, like when we're at points where we're feeling low and we're not feeling like ourselves, like, it's a rainy, depressing day outside and we're feeling that way too. Like maybe it's not the day to push yourself and make yourself do tons and tons of extra stuff. Maybe it's the day just to accept where you are. And to, realize again that like we could be flexible. And on a day where we're feeling good, like, yeah, push yourself those days, but we have to know in our minds, we have to have patience with ourselves. So on that note, and I think Rebbe Nachman, this teaching is so deep, and he wants us to not miss the boat, and he wants us to focus on what we really need to and what's important in life. So we should be zocha to, as that line was, to pray much, to study much, and do good deeds. And we should serve Hashem with simplicity and sincerity. So thank you very much for joining, and have a good night.